The Special Fathers Network is thrilled to be sponsored by Rubin Law, a multi-generational law firm dedicated exclusively to serving families raising children with special needs.
I realized that I need to be the calm one here. The calm one is the one who's the leader. So we were able to kind of disentangle everything, get him back in there. I explained to all the gentlemen, I mean, they're not antagonists. They're out here trying to help somebody who's getting beaten up. They've just got the wrong story because that's not actually what's happening. So that's one thing for people with special needs. If you've got kids with severe disabilities, the world does not understand your kid. You've got to be the brand ambassador for autism. You've got to be calm and in control, and you've got to explain the same thing over and over and over to people.
That's our guest this week, Michael Striegl. Michael, a teacher whose core mission is to help kids, has two of his own, Myra and Jackson, who both have autism. We'll hear Michael's life story of being adopted and raising two kids with varying degrees of special needs. That's all on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Here's our host, David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I'd also like to offer my heartfelt thanks to the following donors who supported the 21CD Ironman campaign, who each contributed $1,000 or more to help keep our programs free to all concerned. In alphabetical order, they are Len Batterson, Ron Boxtaller, Anna and Greg Brown, the Canal Financial Group, Kim Duchessois, Chaz Edelstein, Chris and Christy Kazian, Bob Musikowski, the Peloton Dads Facebook group, Dick Reck, Kevin Richardson, and Tom Wake. Thanks for your generous support.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
So let's listen to this conversation between Michael Striegl and David Hirsch.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Michael Striegl of Anaheim, California, who is a father of two and a high school teacher at Compton Unified School District, Dominguez High. Michael, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
You and your current wife, Telly, have been married for 11 years and are the proud parents of Myra, 19, and Jackson, 17, who both have autism. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
I grew up in Chicago, not too far away from you, David, I think up on the northwest side. My background was I was very lucky when I was growing up. I was adopted at birth through Catholic Charities, and I was adopted to a middle-class family that really wanted to have kids, and so I got to have all the benefits of that growing up. I had a stable middle-class background growing up, went to Catholic school long enough to turn into a complete atheist, and then I was on my own tearing up the streets of Chicago. It was only later in my life that I really made a concerted effort to find my biological family, primarily because I was wondering, is there some history of autism? What's going on there? And, you know, it was always a part of the book of my life that I just had no ideas about. And I'm fortunate to say that I found them. It turned out okay. No history of autism, but I found my biological family.
Well, let's dig a little bit deeper because we did talk about that in a previous conversation. Let's talk about your biological father first. You'd mentioned you only learned about your biological family later in life. How old were you and what were the circumstances that led you to learning about them and what did you find?
Yeah, well, I was really old. This was only 3 years ago, so I was 50. It had, I'm sure like anybody who's adopted out there, you always wonder. And being a high school teacher, I assumed. I've seen all too many teenagers having kids themselves. You just wonder, you look at the chain that's going on in that family. They're growing up, their parents are kids, those kids are going to be passed off to other kids. I mean, not in all cases, but you just wonder. So that's what I always kind of figured. But I didn't know. And over the course of my life, I had written in many charming folk tales about that period of my life, like maybe what it could have been like. And when I was a kid, it was secretly I was a prince or something, stuff like that. And real life rapidly became more interesting and more demanding. Like I say, it was having kids with autism that really made me think about that and probe it. So by the time I found my biological family, I was just a little bit too late. My biological parents had died within 6 months and a year and a half. But I got to discover I had 4 full siblings who never knew about me. And it's been a real treasure getting to know them.
So what did you learn about your dad and your mom, for that matter?
Okay, here's something. This is not probably the most important thing, but to me, subjectively, super important. When I was growing up, and even still now, I feel an affinity towards the sea and towards the ocean. I've always had those kind of longing, sailorish, romantic impulses when you look over to the horizon. And I come to find out that my father was in the Navy, and that was one of the key things behind the adoption of me. This was the Vietnam War. He was in the Navy, and he got my mother pregnant, who was a Catholic schoolgirl at the time. That kind of led up to the to the adoption. That would have been a very different story. But, in me, it always made me wonder, like, what is filial obligation? What is duty? What can be passed down from a father to a son if you never actually meet your father? And I wonder if he felt the same way that I feel about the ocean. I don't know.
How about your siblings, your actual biological siblings?
Yeah, they're a real pleasure. One of the earliest things to understand was it was time for me to look at myself differently too, because I switched generations. The family that adopted me, my parents were World War II era, and I was the youngest in the family. In my biological family, my parents were actually much younger. They were Vietnam era, and I was the oldest of all the siblings. This kind of forced a reevaluation because in sibling constellation, there's a big difference between the oldest and the youngest. The oldest tend to be more serious and more responsible. The youngest tend to be kind of jokers. So it was interesting because it made me look at myself. And I told my brother, Joe, he can still be the oldest brother. I'm not going to swoop in and take that away.
Okay, well, what an amazing gift later in life to learn about your birth parents and then to realize that you have 4 siblings, all younger than you. So thanks for sharing. Very interesting. So let's talk about your dad, the person that raised you from the time that you were adopted. What did he do for a living? And tell me a little bit more about him.
Yeah, he was a beautiful man. He had a lot of gifts. He ended up being a longtime principal in the Chicago public school system. And he really had it in his heart that his mission in life was to care for kids and help bring them up. I will remember one time when I was just a child, he brought me to a school, and I was so young I couldn't spell my own name, but he walked me around the school and like, oh, it's a principal's son. So everybody's like, ah. And then it was recess, and my dad got called to the office. One of the girls had been running around, and she got a piece of glass in her toe, and she was crying and everything. They brought it into my dad. And I was thinking to myself in my kid mind, like, geez, kid, I don't know. You're just out of luck. That's too bad. And my dad went down on his knees, and he got some tweezers, and he picked up her toe, and he looked at it real carefully. And I remember thinking, oh, he said she got the smallest piece in there, which as a kid, I thought, well, wouldn't you want a small piece? It would make a smaller injury. But we know that it's murder to get out, right? And he slowly worked that piece of glass out of her toe. And to me, being a 5-year-old, looking at some strange, dirty kid running around with a bloody foot, I was like, ugh. And I'll never forget how he approached her, just made her feel at ease, did what needed to be done. And that was the kind of person my dad was.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. I'm assuming because you'd said he was a World War II era person that he might not still be alive.
Yeah, he died in 93.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you would have been in your 20s?
Yeah. Yeah, that was good. I spent a lot of my teenage years being extremely angry and rebellious. And the only decent thing about that was I think that my dad saw me turning the corner before he died, and he knew that I was basically going to be okay and not just a complete mess. So that's what makes me feel good. Excellent.
I'm thinking about grandfathers, and I'm wondering if there's any influence that your adopted dad or your adopted mom's fathers would have played in your life.
Oh my gosh, yes. The stories in this family, it's unbelievable. Won't bore you, but so my grandfather on my mom's side, he was World War I vet. He went to France and he served in Verdun and got wounded. My grandfather on my dad's side, the Striegl side, served in World War I in the German army, was also at Verdun, also got wounded. And so you look at this narrative and you just want to go back in time and let these people know, do you know that one day in a distant country, your kids are going to get together and get married? And it shows kind of the ephemera of human conflict and how ridiculous it is because the things that bring us together are stronger than the things that make us apart, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the grandfathers, that was another huge story.
Okay. Well, it is pretty remarkable that they would have fought on different sides of World War I and that the two families somehow, some way, God's irony maybe, got together and here they are. That's pretty amazing.
Yep.
So let's talk about school. I remember, like you were suggesting, you were not on a straight path as a youth. From what I remember you telling me, you went to 7 colleges in 8 years before you got some focus. What's the backstory and how did your education proceed?
Yeah, that's right. I'm a cautionary tale for my own 12th grade students now that they're getting ready to look beyond their own horizons and go into high school. I just did it the wrong way, partially because I specialize in going to the school of hard knocks and nobody could tell me anything and I wanted to do things how I wanted to do it. But I did it the wrong way, so I went to one junior college after another while I was working. Many people know that story, working in the day and going to school at night. And I moved a tremendous number of times. So I kept going to different schools, kept dropping credits, trying to make up new requirements, moving on again. I never really understood. And yet it was either persistence or the fear of failure that kept me going. Like to know that I never really put the pieces together. All the pieces were there, but I just couldn't figure it out. That was the thing that bothered me, that kept, putting one foot in front of the other and getting my ass to school. So that was my story. I took the long way around the block. But again, I tell my students, would I change anything? I don't know. Yes, no. I mean, I like who I am. I'm where I want to be. Things turned out okay. Maybe that was my journey.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. I think it's important for young people and others for that matter to be authentic. So you finished college and then you got a MS in education from University of Illinois at Chicago.
Yeah.
Did that lead you straight into teaching or?
Yeah. I got a job in Chicago Public Schools and that was working out great. I really liked it. And then it was time to move to California. Came to California, took a couple years off to raise my kids. Marriage went into the shredder and got divorced, got my own place, had to get my career back again. Found a job in Compton teaching English, and I've been at my school since. So I'm still serving my core mission, which is to help kids.
Excellent. Well, thanks again. So let's just touch on marriage. Since you just mentioned that your first marriage went into the shredder, and I don't want to be looking back, but your first wife's name was Kim.
Right.
And she's the mother of both of your children. So obviously she's going to play an important role in their lives and your life for the rest of time. And I'm wondering, was it the move Was it the fact that they had special needs? What was it looking backwards that led to the decision or situation that transpired?
That's a good question. I tend to think it was kids with autism. I don't want to overstate that because, I'm sure if we had a perfect marriage, then it wouldn't have done what it did. However, one thing that I really think about having kids with a developmental disability is that it's something that has multiple maturities. You know how like if you have a bond and it matures and you get the dividend? This is something that has multiple maturities. So in the early stages, you're trying to understand what the heck is this? What's going on? How does it affect my kids? And especially if you're first, like the only kids we have are autistic, we don't have a basis of comparison. Like so-and-so was doing this. So it's like it takes years to wrap your arms around what this is, who my kids are, what's supposed to be normal, what's not. And then later on, you come to accept that. And then there's more maturities of how the differences in your kids start piling up until you get to a point where you know what you have, you're familiar with the disability, and you've reached a kind of equilibrium. So I really think it was the move to California. She worked in a new place. I was working from home. I was just being a house dad. I thought I had it made, but as it turns out, those were the 2 hardest years of my life. I kept living the same day over and over again. I was the person in the grocery store who's talking to the cashier like unnecessarily because it was my only adult contact in the day. I was at that stage of parenting, so I'm sure that I was boiling down too. So I think that it was probably many different factors that led to that.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing. We've done a special Zoom call, biweekly Zoom call on divorce, dads with children with special needs and divorce. And, that's just the reality for too many couples is that I've heard it said it's the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back. It's hard enough to be a couple and then to have children and then to add to that special needs, or in your case, 2 children with special needs. So, the odds are sort of stacked against you. You really have to be almost a superhuman person, right, to beat the odds.
Right.
And, it's not the end of life or the end of the world, but no doubt that in and of itself adds some different challenges to your family dynamic, just because.
It does. And, I'm also pleased to report, though, that things have turned out okay. Me and Kim now we're the kind of like divorcees that actually become friends. And I feel closer to her now than when we were married at the end. And I'm over there with the kids every Saturday. So every Saturday I'll come at around 7 o'clock. I'll stay until like 10 p.m. Just take care of everything to give her one day off. And I really like the job that she's done with the kids. I just respect her and admire her. And, things have turned out okay.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. I think it's really important to acknowledge that. So you've been remarried since 2006. You mentioned that Telly is from Jakarta. And from what I remember, you met through the work that she was doing.
That's right. She was an aide in a special education classroom that my son Jack was going to. In California, this is the reason why we moved out here from Chicago, was California and New Jersey, like we talked about, for some reason, seem to be the 2 areas that are like on the cutting edge of autism therapy and research and interventions. So, nothing against New Jersey, but given the choice from Chicago, yeah, going down to the palm trees in the ocean for sure. So one of the great things that they had here in Orange County, California, and maybe this is in other places, I don't know, but they had an assessment center for early intervention. So the districts tended to pick up kids when they were 2, but we know that the research shows that kids with autism, a lot of times they present way earlier than that. And the sooner you can intervene, the better. So this was a program specifically set up for kids 18 to 24 months old. So I had my son Jack in there. And Telly was one of the special education aides. She was a paraprofessional in there. And I got to know her through through my time in the class, because they would let the parents come in. We could see through a one-way glass what they were doing with the kids. But I got to tell you, I was not observing my son. I was observing Telly.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing. So how did the autism diagnoses come about? What was your first reaction?
I didn't know what to make of it, and I have kind of a funny handicap. I tend to be an optimist, and being optimistic gets you in more trouble than being pessimistic. So I didn't really understand what this meant, and maybe it was fine. Maybe that was protective in that way. I thought that things were going to be just fine.
So at what age was Maria diagnosed, and how did that transpire then?
So she was diagnosed at the age of 4. She was diagnosed late. She came out of the box screaming, and you knew right away something was wrong. Like the nurses in the hospital, they were like, this child won't stop screaming. Here you go. And they walked out of the room. We had no idea. People said it was colic. And colic's bad, but you never thought it was like this. She screamed for 2 years straight, every time, every waking moment. So come to look back now, it's not hard to understand why. We were just totally blind to the situation. So, when you hold a baby up. Well, if you have overstimulation with your senses, you're holding a baby up, the baby's staring at the ceiling, staring right into the lights without the ability to look away. Of course a baby's going to scream. Not be walking around with a baby like this being like, oh, please be quiet. Shh, what's the matter? Like I was the matter. Or she was very sensitive on her skin, so she was always pulling at the tags at the back of her shirt. We thought, look, that's cute. She likes to play with tags. We got her toys with tags. And then come to find out, it was probably annoying the heck out of her. She was trying to pull it away with just no idea. So that was not a happy situation. Finally, after going from one thing to another, we had her assessed, and she just had all the red flags for autism. Jack, on the other hand, was different and worse. Jack started out okay. I still remember him. It is painful to remember. For about 14 months, he was a fine, typically growing baby, and then he lost his language, and then he started to regress, and then he fell down deep, deep, deep into a hole. So he's now 10 times more severe than Maria. And Maria is really severe too.
Well, it sounds like two very separate journeys, autism diagnosis journeys, and one being just as challenging, if not more challenging, the next, depending on at what point in time, you're trying to, compare. So if I could paraphrase what you've said, Maria is verbal, Jack is nonverbal, and they're both about the same age, right?
About, 19 and 17.
Right. So chronologically by age, how would they compare in their ability to communicate? I know one's verbal, one's nonverbal, but from an intellectual standpoint, do you have a sense for where they're each at?
Well, intellectually, that's a big challenge with Jackson because he is opaque. So how they compare, it's night and day. Maria's verbal. As a matter of fact, she's verbal to a fault. So part of her self-stimulatory behavior is the fact that she is always talking, literally always talking. And the things that she's talking about, she's running little clips of things that she finds amusing in her head and commenting on them. She's communicative. She will let you know what she wants and what she doesn't like. So that's huge because we know when you can't communicate, the behaviors come. So Jackson is not verbal. So this causes a lot of static. Number one, it causes a lot of behavior because you can't tell what he wants. He can't tell you what he wants. The way he talks is he talks like a deaf person would if you've heard the kind of like somebody who hasn't heard speech trying to approximate it, like, I want this or that. We know his hearing works. It's just the way that his mind is wired. It's the hardest thing in the world for him to produce speech. So when we're asking him to speak, which is like all the time, it's an effort for him. While he is nonverbal, he is not quiet. So he engages in vocal stimulatory, self-stimulatory activities. If you've ever been around severe autistic kids, you've heard the so there's those kind of sounds. Now, this is like well and good, I guess, except when you get out in public, because people don't understand. And many people find these kind of vocalizations disturbing because they haven't heard it before. So even people of good faith will turn around and look, right? And so the lived reality is, as I walk by with Jack and the 3 one-on-one aides and my daughter who's babbling constantly, people look at us and it's like a traveling circus. I know that's a lot in that answer, but yeah.
Wow, that is a lot to take in. It sounds like it could be rather overwhelming or stressful. So I'm thinking about advice, specifically for parents or dads raising a child with differences. Beyond the advice you've already shared, is there anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah, so if you have a child with severe disabilities, one thing that's concerning to me over these past couple of years is you don't want to get yourself and your family shot. This has nearly happened to us on several different occasions. In the news, if you look around, I know here in California, there are instances of autistic people being shot. Not just egregious things where somebody's having a crisis, the cops come over, they lose control, but little things like, for example, in a Costco, this happened last year. In California, in a Costco, there was a family, mom and dad and son with severe autism. The son was a young adult. The son came and apparently I don't know what was going on, but the son did just hit this guy in the back of the head or something. Something bad happened. He was stimming, freaking out. I don't know. The guy turned out to be an off-duty cop. He came up and he was holding his kid. The guy was totally a victim. He came up and he shot the kid. And then, dad was coming saying, no, my son has autism. He got shot too. Mom turned around and ran away. He shot her too. Now, I got to tell you, if I was holding my little daughter and somebody hit me in the back of the head, I think I've been attacked. I can do whatever I want to do. So I kind of, in the moment, I understand what was going on. But people, if you've got a kid with severe disabilities, you're so far out of the experiential range of most people, they don't know what to do. They don't even know if you're playing a prank on them. The very day after this happened last year, I was talking to the aides. And we were getting ready to go for a morning outing. And I mentioned them about the Costco incident. Would you believe that later that day, we're having severe behavior in the car? This was Saturday. And severe behavior is dangerous. I've gotten bit numerous times. It can be horrible. He has 3 people for a reason. So Jack was yelling, screaming, reaching out, trying to pull hair, like not safe to drive. So it's Saturday. I pull into this empty office complex, and we all just roll out of the car. And we have to, it's like a critical thing that we need to do right now. We have to get him on the ground. He needs to be prone. So one guy goes on the legs, one guy gets a hand, I've got another hand. And then I come to look up, and I had parked right in front of a CrossFit fitness studio. And about 30 pumped bros come out. And the story that we're sending is like, here's a bunch of grown men on top of this kid who's screaming and crying. Everybody's like, get off the kid, get off the kid. If we got off him, he would elope. We'd never see him again. So I'm like, I'm dead. You don't understand. I'm trying to de-escalate the situation while containing my son. Then you look up and there's an entire gardening crew holding up their phones, getting the whole thing on tape, amused, wondering where this is going to go. And I was just like, hey, turn off the camera. But I realized we're in public. I have no right to say that. And then I realized that I need to be the calm one here. The calm one is the one who's the leader. So we were able to kind of disentangle everything, get him back in there. I explained to all the gentlemen, they're not antagonists. They're out here trying to help somebody who's getting beaten up. They've just got the wrong story, because that's not actually what's happening. So that's one thing for people with special needs. If you've got kids with severe disabilities, don't get shot. The world does not understand your kid. You've got to be the brand ambassador for autism. You've got to be calm and in control, and you've got to explain the same thing over and over and over to people.
Wow, that's a lot to think about, Michael. Thank you for sharing. I'm sort of curious to know what supporting organizations have been of assistance to you as a family, or specifically to Maria or Jack for that matter.
Yeah, so we've had several organizational supports. The most important of the organizational supports is the Regional Center of Southern California, and I believe regional centers are set up nationwide. Anyways, long story short, the Regional Center has been really important to us because they have been able to fund a company that provides one-on-one aids to us. Because now that Jack is older, he engages in behaviors that are extremely challenging, both self-injurious and aggressive, to the point where he requires 3-on-1 aids during the day and 2-on-1 aids at night. So they accompany Jack. It's basically 3 big guys who are trained in the basics of PROACT. They're designed to keep him safe and other people around safe. And like I say, it's even 2-on-1 at night from 8 to 8. So at 3 in the morning, you can come out and there's a couple of guys there on their phone. Regional Center was the body that set up funding for these in-home aids to come. And that's been really important because doing this on our own would have been difficult.
Does that take place at your home as well as Kim's, or?
We're usually based at Kim's home just because we know autism is the sameness disease, and changing things up can sometimes lead to problems that you didn't anticipate. But when I bring them over here, the aides come over here. We all go together. We're one big traveling show.
Okay. Like you said, it's a different challenge altogether.
Yeah.
I remember in our prior conversation, you mentioned something about the Spirit League, and I'm wondering what your involvement has been there as well.
Yeah, so Spirit League is great. So Maria is fortunate enough to go to a private school for kids with autism. And one of the things that they organize, it's mostly through the school, but it's a separate organization. It's called Spirit League. And anybody who has played in any of the various leagues will recognize the structure. But this is a league just for developmentally disabled kids. They have 3 seasons, and it is really valuable because on Saturdays I've coached for 10 years. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I do know kids, and I do know that's where kids should be on Saturday, out in the park, on the grass, kicking a ball around, like around each other. That's what kids need. Doesn't take a genius to see that. So Spirit League is a thing that is able to provide that. And so that's really great, because if it wasn't for that, there's just no opportunities for socialization.
Okay. I remember the name Adrian Silva, but I can't remember in what context.
Yeah, so she has been really valuable to us. She is an ABA therapist, and she's been with us for the long haul. She has gone through several different companies. She started her own company, but she's been great. And with her, I realized the benefit of having an advocate. She knows our kids really well. She has designed ABA programs for them, and she's been able to accompany us to IEPs. And, you know, whenever we roll into an IEP, it's like half the school district shows up. I mean, there's literally therapists and administrators and teachers, and everybody gives their report, and it kind of feels it's easy to feel overwhelmed because everybody wants you to go along with the program. Everybody has their own thing. And I have found that it's Adrian, because as a parent, if you start asking questions, you can very easily be like, get the reputation like being hard to deal with. But I found that it's Adrian who not only asks hard questions, but she thinks of questions I didn't even think of. I'm like, oh, wow. So anyways, she's been really helpful to have on our side through the long haul.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing. I'm sort of curious to know, why is it that you've agreed to be a father as part of the Special Fathers Network?
Hey, you know what? I really like your mission. And like I said, I've seen a lot of focuses on moms, as there should be, and on kids, as there should be, but nobody ever talks about dads until I heard about you and your broadcast. So I applaud you for that. And if there's some usefulness somebody can get out of this, just down with it for sure.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. Thank you for being part of the effort. Let's give a special shout out to our mutual friend, Dr. Lisa Boscovich, for making the introduction.
Excellent. Yeah, congratulations, Lisa.
If somebody wants to learn more about your situation or to contact you, what's the best way about doing that, Michael?
Yeah, just email me. I'm happy to talk to people. Do you want an email address?
Sure.
Oh my God, it's you're going to regret this. It's my name. So it's Michael, Michael, Striegl, Striegl, the number 2, because somebody got that before I did. So it's Michael Striegl 2, all one word, @gmail.com.
We'll be sure to include that in the show notes to make it as easy as possible for somebody to reach out to you.
I would be happy to help for sure.
Michael, thank you for taking the time and many insights. As a reminder, Michael is just one of the individuals who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. Would you please share the podcast and post a review on iTunes to help us build our audience? Also remember to subscribe so you'll get a reminder when each new episode is produced. Michael, thanks again.
David, it's been a pleasure.
And thank you for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, presented by the Special Fathers Network. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for fathers to support fathers. Go to 21stcenturydads.org. That's 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Also, please be sure to register for the Special Fathers Network bi-weekly Zoom calls held on the first and third Tuesdays of every month. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen. The Dad to Dad podcast was produced by Couch Audio for the Special Fathers Network. Thanks again to Reuben Law for supporting the Dad to Dad podcast. Call Reuben Law at 847-279-7999 and mention the Special Fathers Network for a free consultation. 847-279-7999.